Hey everyone, it's Miss Katy again. Today I am coming to you from the playground at school. Mrs. Whited and I are still coming into school a couple days a week, so I thought that because Bilbo's kind of starting out on his adventure, today I would read for you chapter 2 out of the Hobbit from the playground because it's a little bit of an adventure now. Now you see me back at school and not in my house. So we finished chapter 1 up. And I'll give you a little bit of recap. So for chapter 1, we met Bilbo. We learned about what a hobbit was. We met Gandalf. And then, of course, Gandalf invited all the dwarves over to Bilbo's house because he's trying to get him to go on an expedition to help the dwarves get back to the Lonely Mountain, which was where their home was. So in the end of the last chapter, we kind of heard about Smaug and how they got kicked out of the Lonely Mountain and kind of that they need a burglar. They need a 14th member for their expedition. And so they want Bilbo to be in it. And at the end of the chapter, everybody kind of went to bed and nothing was decided. So I'm going to start out with chapter 2 so we kind of figure out what's going from there. And it's a relatively short chapter, so this video may not be as long, but that's okay. So if you're following along in your own copy, we're starting on chapter 2, which is called Roast Mutton. Up jumped Bilbo, and putting on his dressing gown, went into the dining room. There he saw nobody but the signs of a large hurried breakfast. There was a fearful mess in the room, and piles of unwashed crocks in the kitchen. Nearly every pot and pan he possessed had been used. The washing up was so dismally real that Bilbo was forced to believe the party of the night before had not been part of his bad dreams, as he had rather hoped. Indeed, he was really relieved after all to think that they had gone on without him and without bothering to wake him up. But with never a thank you, he thought. Yet in a way he could not help but feeling a trifle disappointed. The feeling surprised him. Don't be a fool, Bilbo Baggins, he said to himself, thinking about dragons and all of that outlandish nonsense at your age. Now, I don't know if you guys remember, but it did say at the beginning of the book that Bilbo is actually in his 50s. If you've seen the Lord of the Rings movie, you see that Bilbo actually lives beyond 100, which I feel like they kind of make a point of saying that that's a little weird, but that, he's middle-aged. He shouldn't be thinking about going on a quest and dragons at his age. So he put on an apron, lit fires, boiled water, and washed up. Then he had a nice little breakfast in the kitchen before turning out of the dining room. By that time the sun was shining and the front door was open, letting in a warm spring breeze. Bilbo began to whistle loudly and forgot about the night before. In fact, he was just sitting down to a nice little second breakfast in the dining room by the window when in walked Gandalf. "My dear fellow, whenever are you going to come? What about an early start? And here you are having breakfast, or whatever you call it, at 10:30. They left you a message because they could not wait." "What message?" asked poor Mr. Baggins in a fluster. "Great elephants," Gandalf said. "You are not at all yourself this morning. You have never even dusted the mantelpiece." "What's that got to do with it? I have had enough washing to do with the 14. If you had dusted the mantelpiece, you would have found this under the clock." Gandalf handed Bilbo a note, written of course on his own notepaper, and this is what it read. "Thorin and Company to Burglar Bilbo greeting. For your hospitality, our sincerest thanks, and for your offer of professional assistance, our grateful acceptance. Terms, cash on delivery, up to and not exceeding 1/14 of total profits, if any. All traveling expenses guaranteed in any event. Funeral expenses to be defrayed by us or our representatives if occasion arises, and the matter is not otherwise arranged for. Thinking it unnecessary to disturb your esteemed repose, we have proceeded in advance to make requisite preparations, and shall await your respected person at the Green Dragon Inn, Bywater, at 11 a.m. sharp, trusting you will be punctual. We have the honor to remain yours deeply, Thorin and Company." "That leaves in just 10 minutes. You'll have to run," said Gandalf. "But," Bilbo said, "no time for that either. Off you go." To the end of his days, Bilbo could never remember how he found himself outside, without a hat, a walking stick, or any money, or anything he usually took with him when he went out, leaving his second breakfast half finished and quite unwashed, pushing his keys into Gandalf's hands and running as fast as his furry feet could carry him down the lane, past the great mill, across the water, and then on for a mile or more. Very puffed he was when he got to Bywater, just on the stroke of 11, and he found he had come without a pocket handkerchief. "Bravo!" said Balin, who was standing at the inn door looking for him. Just then the others came around the corner of the road from the village. They were on ponies, and each pony was slung with all kinds of bags, packages, parcels, and paraphernalia. There was a very small pony, apparently for Bilbo. "Up you two get, and off we go," said Thorin. "I'm awfully sorry," said Bilbo, "but I have come without my hat, and I have left my pocket handkerchief behind, and I haven't got any money. And I didn't get your note until after 10:45, to be precise." "Don't be precise," Dwalin said, "and don't worry. You will have to manage without a pocket handkerchief, and good many other things before the journey's end. As for a hat, I've got a spare hood and a cloak in my luggage." That's how they all came to start, jogging off from the inn one morning before May on laden ponies. And Bilbo was wearing a dark green hood, a little weather-stained, and a dark green cloak borrowed from Dwalin. They were far too large for him, and looked rather comic. When his father Bungo would have thought of it, I daren't think. His only comfort was that he wouldn't be mistaken for a dwarf, as he had no beard. They had not been riding long when they came upon Gandalf, very splendid on a white horse. He had brought a lot of pocket handkerchiefs and Bilbo's pipe and tobacco. So after the party went along merrily, they told stories and sang songs as they rode forward all day, except, of course, when they stopped for meals. These didn't come quite as often as Bilbo would have liked, but he still began to feel that adventures weren't so bad so far. At first they had passed through Hobbit lands, a wide, respectable country inhabited by decent folk, with good roads in an inn or two, and now and then a dwarf or a farmer ambling by on business. Then they came to lands where people spoke strangely and sang songs Bilbo had never heard of. They had gone far into the lone lands, where there were not many people left, no inns, and the roads grew steadily worse. Not far ahead were dreary hills, rising higher and higher, dark-looking trees. On some of them were old castles with an evil look, as if they had been built by wicked people. Now, I'll link the map for the Hobbit again down in the comments like I did with the last video. But you'll see in the progression of the path is that now they're leaving the Shire, which is where all the hobbits live. And not a lot of people go that way because they don't really know about the hobbits. Everything seemed gloomy, for the weather that day had taken a nasty turn. Most of it had been good as May could be, even in Merry Tales, but now it was cold and wet. In the lone lands, they had been obliged to camp when they could, but at least it had been dry. "To think it will be June soon," grumbled Bilbo, as he splashed along the others in a very muddy track. It was after tea time. It was pouring with rain, and it had been all day. His hood was dripping into his eyes, his cloak was full of water, and his pony was tired and stumbling on stones. The others were too grumpy to talk. "I'm sure this rain has gotten into dry clothes and into food bags," thought Bilbo. "Bother burgling and everything to do with it. I wish I was at home, in my nice hole by the fire, with the kettle just beginning to sing." It was not the last time he would wish for that. Still the dwarves jogged on, never turning round or taking any notice of the Hobbit. Somewhere behind the gray clouds the sun must have gone down, for it was beginning to get dark as they went up and down the deep valley, with a river at the bottom. Wind up, and willows along the bank bends inside. Unfortunately, the road went over an ancient stone bridge, and for the river, swollen with the rains, came rushing down from the hills and the mountains to the north. It was nearly night when they had crossed over. The wind broke up the gray clouds, and a wandering moon appeared above the hills, between the flying rags. When they stopped, Thorin muttered something about supper, and "Where shall we get a dry patch to sleep?" Not until they notice that Gandalf was missing. So far he had come all the way with him, never saying if he was on the adventure or merely keeping them company for a while. But he had eaten most, talked most, and laughed most. But now he simply wasn't there at all. "Just when a wizard would have been most useful too," groaned Dorian Nori, who shared the Hobbit's view about regular meals, plenty and often. They decided in the end they would have to camp where they were. They moved a clump of trees, and though it was drier under them, the wind shook the rain off the leaves, and the drip drip was most annoying. Also, the mischief seemed to have gotten into the fire. Dwarves can make a fire almost anywhere, almost out of anything, wind or no wind, but they could not do it that night. Not even Oin or Gloin, who were especially good at it. Then one of the ponies took fright at nothing and bolted. He got into the river before they could catch him, and before they could get him out again, Keely and Feely were nearly drowned, and all the baggage that he carried was washed away off of him. Of course, it was mostly food, and there would be mighty left for supper and even less for breakfast. There they all sat, wet and muttering, while Oin and Gloin went on trying to light the fire and quarreling about it. Bilbo was sadly reflecting that the adventures were not all pony rides in May sunshine, when Balin, who was always their lookout, said, "There's a light over there." There was a hill some way off with the trees, pretty thick in parts. Out of the dark mass of trees, they could see a light shining, a red, comfortable-looking light, as it might be a fire or torches twinkling. When they had looked for it for some while, they fell to arguing. Some said no, and some said yes, and some said they could go see, but anything was better than little supper, less breakfast, and wet clothes all night long. Others said, "These parts are none too well known, and are too near the mountains. Travelers seldom come this way now. The old maps are no use. Things have changed for the worse, and the road is unguarded. They have seldom even heard the king round here, and less inquisitive than you are to go along, and less trouble you are likely to find." Some said, "After all, there are 14 of us." Others said, "Where has Gandalf gotten to?" This remark was repeated by everybody. The rain had begun to pour down worse than ever, and Oin and Gloin began to fight. That settled it. "After all, we have a burglar with us," they said. So they made off, leading their ponies, with all due and proper caution, in direction of the light. They came to the hill, and were soon in the wood. Up the hill they went, but there was no proper path to be seen, such as might lead to a house or a farm, and what they could make was a great deal of rustling and crackling and creaking, and a good deal of grumbling and dratting, as they went through the trees in pitch dark. Suddenly the red light shone out very brightly through the tree trunks not far off. "Now it's the burglar's turn," they said, meaning Bilbo. "You must go and find out all about the light, and what it is for, and if it is perfectly safe and canny," said Thorin to the hobbit. "Now scuttle off, and come back quick, if all is well, and if all is not, come back if you can. If you can't, hoot twice like a barn owl, and once like a screech owl, and we will do what we can." Off Bilbo had to go. Before he could explain, he could not even hoot like any kind of owl, any more than fly like a bat. But at any rate, hobbits can move pretty quietly in woods, absolutely quietly. They take a pride in it, and Bilbo had sniffed more than once at what he called all this dwarfish racket as they went along, although I don't suppose you or I would have noticed anything on a windy night, not if the whole cavalcade had passed in 2 feet. As for Bilbo walking primly towards the red light, I don't suppose even a weasel would have stirred a whisker at it. So naturally, he got right up to the fire, or for a fire it was, without disturbing anyone, and this is what he saw. 3 very large persons sitting around a large fire of beech logs. They were tossing mutton onto the large spits of wood, and licking their gravy off their fingers. There was a fine toothsome smell. There was also a barrel of good drink at hand, and they were drinking out of jugs. But they were trolls, obviously trolls. Even Bilbo, despite his sheltered life, could see that from their great heavy faces, and their size, and the shape of their legs, not to mention their language, which was not drawing-room fashion at all. "Mutton yesterday, mutton today, and blimey, if I don't know, it looks like mutton all over again tomorrow," said one of the trolls. "Never a blinking bit of man-flesh we've had for long enough," said the second. What the hell William was thinking, off to bring us to these parts, it beats me, and the drink running short, what's more," he said, jogging the elbow of William, who was taking a pull at his jug. William choked. "Shut your mouth," he said as soon as he could. "You can't expect folk to stop here just at by you and Bert. You've at a village and half between yer since we come down from the mountains. How much more do you want? And time's been up our way when you'd have, thank you, Bill, for a nice bit of fat leg mutton like what this is." He took a bite off of a sheep's leg as he was roasting, and wiped it on his lips on his sleeve. Yes, I'm afraid trolls do behave like that, even though they had 1 head each. After hearing all of this, Bilbo ought to have done something. Either he should have gone back quietly and warned his friends that there were 3 fair-sized trolls at hand in a nasty mood, which were quite likely to want to try roast dwarf, or even pony for a chance. Or else he should have gone and done a quick bit of burglaring. Really first-class and legendary burglar would at this point have picked the troll's pockets. It is very nearly always worth something if you can manage it. Pinched without mutton off the spits, purloined the beer, walked off without them noticing. Other more practical, but less professional pride would have stuck the dagger into each one of them before they observed it. Then the night could have been spent cheerily. Bilbo knew it. He had read a good many things and that he had never seen or done. He was already much alarmed, as well as disgusted. He wished himself 100 miles away, and yet he could not go straight back to Thorin and company empty-handed. So he stood, hesitating in the shadows. Of the various burglarious proceedings he had heard of, picking the troll's pockets seemed the least difficult, so at last he crept up behind the tree, just behind William. Bert and Tom went off the barrel. William was having another drink. Then Bilbo plucked up the courage and lifted his hands into William's enormous pocket. There was a purse in it, as big as Bilbo himself. Ha! He thought, and began warming to his new work as he carefully lifted it out. This is a beginning. It was. Trolls' purses are the mischief, and this was no exception. "Here, who are you?" it squeaked as it left the pocket. And William turned round once more and grabbed Bilbo by the neck before he could duck into the tree. "Blimey, Bert, look what I've copped," William said. "What is it?" said the others, coming up. "Lume if I know. What are you?" "Bilbo Baggins, Bert, a hobbit," said Bilbo, shaking all over and wondering how to make owl noises before they throttled him. "A burra hobbit?" they said, a bit startled. Trolls are slow in the uptake and mighty suspicious about anything new to them. "What's a burra hobbit got to do with my pocket anyways?" said William. "And can you cook 'em?" asked Tom. "Yer could try," said Bert, picking up a skewer. "He wouldn't make but a mouthful," said William, who had already had a fine supper. "Not when he was skinned and boned." "Perhaps there are more like him round, and we might be able to make a pie," said Bert. "Here you are. Are there any more of your sort of sneaking in the woods, your nasty little rabbits?" And he looked at the hobbit's furry feet and picked him up by the toes and shook him. "Oh, yes, lots," said Bilbo before he remembered not to give his friends away. No, none at all," he said immediately afterwards. "What do you mean?" Bert said, holding him up right away, this time by the hair. "What I say," Bilbo said, gasping. "Please don't cook me, kind sirs. I am a good cook myself, and cook better than you cook, if you see what I mean. I'll cook beautifully for you, a perfect beautiful breakfast for you, if only you won't have me for supper." "Poor little blighter," said William. He had already had so much supper as could hold, and he had also had a lot of beer. Not till what he says means by lots and none at all," said Bert. "I don't want to have me throat cut in me sleep. Hold his toes in the fire till he talks." "I won't have it," said William. "I caught him anyways." "You're a fat fool, William," said Bert. "As if I'd all before this evening. You're Aloud." "I won't take him from you, Bill Huggins," said Bert, and put his fist in William's eye. Then there was a gorgeous row. Bilbo had just enough wits left, when Bert dropped him on the ground, to scramble out of their way before they were fighting like dogs and calling each other out of sorts on perfectly true and applicable sounding names in very loud voices. Soon they were locked in each other's arms, rolling nearly into the fire, kicking and thumping, while Tom whacked at them both with a branch to bring them to their senses. And that, of course, only made them madder than ever. That would have been the time for Bilbo to have left, but his poor little feet had been very squashed in Bert's big paw, so he had no breath left in his body, and his head was going round, so he lay there a while panting, just outside the circle of firelight. Right in the middle of the fight, up came Balin. The dwarfs had heard noises from a distance, and after wanting for some time for Bilbo to come back, or to hoot like an owl, they started off one by one to creep towards the light as quietly as they could. No sooner did Tom see Balin come into the light than he gave an awful howl. Trolls simply detest the very sight of dwarves, uncooked, that is. Bert and Bill stopped fighting immediately and said, "A sack, Tom, quick!" Before Balin, who was wondering what all the commotion was, knew what was happening, a sack was bunched over his head and he went down. Now I've got a little bit of a picture here that one of the artists from the original edition of the book drew. So as you can see, there's his rendition of the trolls sitting around their campfire. "There's lots more to come yet," said Tom, "or I'm mighty mistook. Lots and none at all of it is. No burra hobbits, but a lot of these here dwarves, and that's the shape of it." "I reckon you're right," said Bert. "We better get out of the light." And so they did. With their sacks in their hands, they waited for them they used the sacks that they used for carrying off mutton and other plunder. They waited in the shadows. As each dwarf came up and looked at the fire, and then spilled jugs and gnawed mutton, in surprise, pop went a nasty-smelling sack over their head, and he was down. Soon Dwalin lay by Balin and Feely and Keely together, and Dory and Nori and Ori all in a heap, and Oin and Gloin and Biffer, Boffer, and Bomber piled uncomfortably near the fire. "That'll teach 'em," said Tom, for Biffer and Bomber had given a lot of trouble and fought like mad, as dwarves will while cornered. Thorin came last, but he was not caught unawares. He came expecting mischief, and didn't see his friend's legs sticking out of the sacks to tell him that things were not well. He stood outside the shadows of some way off, and said, "What's all this trouble? Who's been knocking my people about?" "It's trolls," said Bilbo behind the tree. "They forgot about him. They were hiding in the bushes with sacks," he said. "Oh, are they?" Thorin said, and he jumped forward into the fire before they could leap on him. He caught a big branch, all on fire at one end, and Bert got that end in his eye before he could step aside, and that put him out of the battle for a bit. Bilbo did his best. He caught hold of Tom's leg as well as he could. It was thick as a young tree trunk, but he was sent spinning up the top of some bushes when Tom kicked the sparks in Thorin's face. Tom got the branch in his teeth for that and lost one of his front ones. It made him howl, I can tell you. But right over that moment, William came up behind and popped a sack right over Thorin's head, down to his toes, and so the fight ended. A nice pickle they were all in now, all neatly tied up in sacks, with 3 angry trolls, and 2 with burns and bashes to remember, sitting by them, arguing whether they should roast them slowly or mince them into fine pieces and boil them, or just sit on them one by one and squash them into jelly. Bilbo up in a bush with his clothes and his skin torn, daring not to move for fear they should hear him. It was just then that Gandalf decided to come back, but no one saw him, and the trolls had decided to roast the dwarves now and eat them later. This was Bert's idea. After a lot of argument, they'd all agreed. "No good roasting 'em now, it'll take all night," said a voice Bert thought was William's. "Don't start the argument over, Bill," he said, "or it will take all night." "Who's a-arguing?" said William, who thought it was Bert who had spoken. "You are," said Bert. "You're a liar," said William, so the argument began all over again. In the end, they decided to mince them fine and boil them, so they got a great black pot, and they took out their knives. "No good boiling 'em, we ain't got no water, and it's a long way to the well and all," said a voice. Bert and William thought it was Tom's. "Shut yourself," said Tom, who thought it was William's voice. "Who's arguing but you, I'd like to know?" "You're a Bobby," said William. "Bobby yourself," said Tom. And the argument began all over again, and went on hotter than ever, until the last they decided to sit on the sacks one by one and squash them and boil them into jelly. "Who shall we sit on first?" said a voice. "Better sit on the last one first," said Bert, whose eyes had been damaged by Thorin. He thought Tom was talking. "Don't talk to yourself," Tom said, "but if he wants to sit on the last one, sit on him. Which one is it?" "The one with the yellow stockings," said Bert. "Nonsense, the one with the gray stockings," said a voice like William's. "I made sure it was yellow," said Bert. "Yellow it was," said William. "Then what did you say the gray was for?" said Bert. "I never did. Tom said it." "I never did that," said Tom. "It was you." 2-1, so shut your mouth," said Bert. "Now who you a-talking to?" said William. "Now stop," said Bert together. "The night is getting on, and dawn comes early. Let's get on with it." "Dawn take you all, and be stoned to you," said a voice that sounded like William's. But it wasn't, for it was that moment a light came over the hill, and there was a mighty twitter in the branches. William never spoke, for he turned to stone as he stooped, and Bert and Tom were stuck like rocks when he looked at them. And there they stand to this day, all alone, unless the birds perch on them. For trolls, as you probably know, must be underground before dawn, or they go back to the stuff of the mountains that they are made of and never move again. That is exactly what happened to Tom, Bert, and William. "Excellent," said Gandalf, as he stepped from behind a tree and helped Bilbo climb down the thorn bush. Then Bilbo understood. It was the wizard's voice had been making the trolls bicker and quarrel until the light came, and to the end of them. The next thing was to untie the sacks and let out the dwarves. They were all nearly suffocated and very annoyed. They had not all been enjoy lying there listening to the trolls make plans to roast them and squash them and mince them. They had to hear Bilbo's account of what happened to him twice over before they were satisfied. "Silly time to want to go practicing pinching and pocket picking," said Bomber, "when all we wanted was fire and food." And that is is that what you wouldn't have gotten all those fellows without a struggle in any case, said Gandalf. Anyhow, you're wasting time now. Don't you realize that trolls must have a cave or a hole somewhere nearby to hide from the sun in? We must go search it. They searched about and soon found the marks of the trolls' stony boots going away from the trees. They followed the tracks up to a hill until, hidden by bushes, they came on a big door of stone leading to a cave. But they could not open it. Not that they pushed while Gandalf tried various incantations. Would this be any good? Said Bilbo. They were getting tired and angry. I found it on the ground when the trolls had their fight. He found a largish key, but no doubt William must have thought it very small and secret. It must have fallen out of his pocket very luckily before he turned to stone. Why on earth didn't you mention it before? They cried. Gandalf grabbed it and fitted it into the keyhole, and the stone swung back with one big push, and they all went inside. There were bones on the floor, and a nasty smell was in the air. But there was a good deal of food jumbled carelessly on shelves and on the ground among an untidy litter of plunder, all sorts of from brass buttons to pots of gold standing in the corner. There were lots of clothes, too, hanging on the wall, too small for trolls. I'm afraid they belonged to victims, and among them were several swords of various makes, shapes, and sizes. Two caught their eyes particularly because of their beautiful scabbard and jeweled hilts. Gandalf and Thorin each took one of these, and Bilbo took a knife in a leather sheath. It would have made only a tiny pocket knife for a troll, but it was as good as a short sword for this hobbit. These look like good blades, said the wizard, half drawing them and looking at them curiously. They were not made by any troll, nor by any smith among men in these parts and days. But we can read the runes on them. We shall know about them more. Let's get out of this horrid smell, said Fili. So they carried out the pots of coins and food that was untouched that looked fit to eat, and also one barrel of ale, which was still full. By the time they felt like breakfast, and being very hungry, they did not turn their noses up at what they had gotten from the troll's larder. Their own provisions were very scanty. Now they had bread and cheese, plenty of ale, and bacon to toast in the embers of the fire. After that they slept, for their night had been disturbed, and they did nothing more until the afternoon. They brought up their ponies and carried away the pots of gold and buried them very secretly not far from the tracks of the river, putting a great many spells over them just in case they'd ever have the chance to come back and recover them. When that was done, they all mounted once more and jogged along the pathway towards the east. Where did you go, if I may ask? Thorin asked Gandalf as they rode along. To look ahead, he said. And what brought you back in the nick of time? Looking behind, he said. Exactly, said Thorin, but could you be more plain? I went to spy our road. It will soon become dangerous and difficult. I was also anxious to replenish our small stack of provisions. I had not gone very far, however, when I met a couple of friends of mine from Rivendell. Where's that? Asked Bilbo. Don't interrupt, said Gandalf. You will get there in a few days now, and if we're lucky, we'll find out all about it. As I was saying, I met two of Elrond's people. They were hurrying along for fear of trolls, and it was they who told me that the three of them had settled down in the mountains, in the woods not far from here. They had frightened everyone away from the district and wayland strangers. I immediately had a feeling I wanted to go back. Looking behind, I saw a fire in the distance and made for it. So now you should know. Please be more careful next time, or we shall never get anywhere. Thank you, said Thorin. So that's the end of chapter 2. I hope you guys all enjoyed listening to it. I know it's a bit noisy out here, so hopefully that'll come through all right. But thank you for tuning in, and since Bilbo is now on his adventure, I think that the next few times that I record, I think I might have to go on an adventure and find fun places for me to post. I know that we all just don't know what's happening in the next couple months, but I just want you guys to know that Mrs. Whited and I really miss you, and that while I'm really enjoying reading The Hobbit to you right now, I wish that it was in class and not out here on the playground where nobody is in the middle of the week. So I hope that you guys are all having a fantastic week, and I will see you soon. Bye.